The first time it happened, nobody in the building believed it was real. That was the chilling part, how quickly confusion turned into silence. The announcement came over the loudspeaker in a monotone voice: "This is a lockdown. Teachers, secure your classrooms immediately." At first, some students laughed, assuming it was just another drill. But the urgency in the principal's voice, that slight tremor hidden behind the flat announcement, carried a weight that everyone in the room felt in their stomachs. The teacher, Mrs. McKenna, bolted from her desk, flicked off the lights, and ordered everyone away from the windows. The class of juniors and seniors shuffled toward the far corner, whispering nervously, their sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor. Someone muttered, "This is just practice, right?" But no one answered. That silence, heavier than anything, wrapped itself around them like a shroud. The hallway outside was usually filled with the endless chatter of lockers slamming, laughter, and the smell of cafeteria pizza. Now it was dead quiet. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder, like the building itself was holding its breath. A loud metallic bang echoed down the hall, and someone gasped. One boy clutched his phone so tight his knuckles turned white. The teacher shot him a look and motioned for him to put it away. Every noise felt magnified, the shifting of jeans against the tile, a stifled cough, even the sound of someone's heartbeat in the silence. The students pressed together, every second stretching longer than the last. Then came footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They seemed to move right past their door, pausing for just a moment too long. One girl's hand clamped over her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. The metal handle of the classroom door rattled suddenly, once, twice, then stopped. A boy sitting nearest to it nearly screamed but managed to press his fists against his lips, trembling. Everyone froze. The footsteps lingered, shuffling, then faded into the distance. The teacher's hand trembled as she kept a firm grip on the door's locking mechanism, as if sheer willpower would keep it from turning. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. The principal's voice didn't return. Nobody knew if this was the police, an intruder, or some sick prank. The uncertainty gnawed at them like teeth in the dark. Somewhere down the hall, faintly, came another sound, something that didn't belong. A muffled cry, quickly silenced. The girl in the corner shook her head violently, mouthing, "No, no, no." The dread was unbearable, a pressure in the chest that made it hard to breathe. The teacher slowly knelt down, whispering that no one could move, no matter what. The seconds ticked by, but time seemed broken. Outside the window, the late afternoon sky was already dimming, shadows crawling up the walls. Then, finally, the crackle of the loudspeaker returned, but it wasn't the principal's voice. It was a different one. A male voice, low, steady, with no emotion: "You can't hide forever." Every student's stomach dropped at once, the terror flooding their veins like ice water. Some kids silently sobbed into their sleeves, others stared at the locked door, waiting for it to burst open. Mrs. McKenna's eyes darted to the ceiling, then to the children, her face pale as ash. Whatever was happening, this wasn't a drill. This was something far worse, and they all knew it. The voice on the loudspeaker wasn't supposed to be there. Every student knew it, and the teacher's horrified expression confirmed it. The intercom was only accessible from the main office, locked and monitored. To hear someone other than the principal, someone who sounded like they were enjoying the panic they were causing, made the room feel colder than it already was. The words echoed in their heads: "You can't hide forever." The room's air grew stifling, the silence now carved out by the faint sobbing of a freshman who couldn't stop trembling. Mrs. McKenna crawled toward her desk, careful to stay low, and reached for her phone. But before she could dial, the faint static from the loudspeaker returned, like someone was still there, listening. Everyone stared up at the ceiling where the little speaker sat, waiting for another message. Instead, the sound of faint breathing came through. Deep, steady, almost too close. Whoever it was, they weren't just playing with the system, they were inside the building, holding the power over every room. Suddenly, a piercing bang erupted from the gymnasium down the hall. It sounded like a door being slammed open, the crash reverberating through the vents. Then came another sound, sneakers squeaking fast across the polished floor, followed by a scream cut short. Students clutched one another, their eyes darting to Mrs. McKenna, searching for answers she didn't have. She mouthed the word "stay down" again and again. The hallway outside their classroom erupted in chaos. Lockers banged. Something heavy scraped across the floor. Then, silence. A silence so complete it made every student's pulse sound deafening in their ears. The handle to their door shifted again, this time slower, testing. The teacher pressed both hands against it, bracing her weight. Whoever was outside whispered something unintelligible, low and menacing, before letting go. Minutes bled into each other, each one stretching like a lifetime. Then, the sound of sirens, faint but growing, seeped through the walls. Relief flickered in their eyes. Police. Help was here. But almost instantly, the loudspeaker crackled back on. The same voice, mocking now, too late. A laugh followed, distorted by the cheap intercom system, but still unmistakably human. Mrs. McKenna's phone buzzed suddenly, making her jolt. She scrambled to silence it, but it was too late, the faint vibration against the desk echoed in the quiet. Heavy, deliberate footsteps returned outside the door, closer than ever, and this time they didn't pass by. They stopped right in front. A pause. Then 3 sharp knocks. Slow. Rhythmic. Taunting. The students huddled closer, some burying their faces in their arms. One boy muttered a prayer under his breath. The knock stopped, replaced by a dragging sound along the door, like fingernails trailing against the wood. Then, silence again. The sirens outside grew louder, closer, but no one dared move. A shadow passed under the narrow crack of the door, faint but real, before fading away. After what felt like an eternity, the loudspeaker clicked again, but this time it was the principal's voice, frantic and shaking. "Stay where you are. Police are inside. Do not open your doors for anyone but uniformed officers." It should have brought comfort, but the damage was already done. They had all heard the intruder's voice. They knew someone was playing a game with them, moving through the halls, controlling the intercom, knocking on doors like a predator circling prey. And the worst part, the police might have been too late. Suddenly, a gunshot shattered the air. The boom rattled the windows, made the floor tremble beneath them. Screams erupted down the hallway, faint but unmistakable. The freshmen sobbed harder now, covering their ears. Mrs. McKenna's face was pale, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Don't move. Don't make a sound." Another shot rang out, closer this time. Then another. Each one felt like a hammer smashing through the fragile sense of safety they'd built in that locked classroom. Finally, the footsteps outside returned once more, but now running. Fast. Furious. They pounded past their door, down the hall, fading into chaos. The intercom clicked again, static filling the air before the same chilling voice whispered one last time, "I'm not done yet." Then silence. The students didn't breathe. The teacher's hand shook on the lock. Somewhere outside, officers shouted commands, boots stomping across the tile. But inside that classroom, the feeling was the same: they weren't safe, not really. Whatever had invaded their school wasn't finished, and deep down, they all knew it. The pounding of boots echoed through the hallways as police swarmed the building. From their darkened classroom, the students could only make out muffled shouts, the metallic clang of doors being forced open, and the distant wail of more sirens converging on the school. For a moment, hope flared, maybe it was finally over. Maybe the nightmare was ending. But no one dared move from the corner. They stayed crouched in the shadows, breaths shallow, waiting for the sound of a uniformed officer at their door. Minutes dragged by, and the noise outside only deepened the unease. Officers barked commands, their voices sharp, but there was no clarity. At one point, a woman screamed in the distance, followed by another gunshot that rattled the walls. Mrs. McKenna flinched, her hand gripping the lock so tightly her knuckles looked bone-white. A junior whispered, "Why aren't they getting us out?" The teacher only shook her head, eyes glistening, as though she didn't dare to answer. Then the intercom crackled again. This time, the voice was faint, broken by static, but every word froze the blood in their veins. "You're opening the wrong doors." A distorted chuckle followed, low and deliberate. Several kids broke into tears. It wasn't possible. How was the intruder still speaking through the school's system when police were inside? The idea that he could be anywhere, maybe even in the main office where the intercom was controlled, was unbearable. A loud pounding erupted on their classroom door. "Police! Open up," a man's voice yelled. Mrs. McKenna nearly jumped to her feet, but she froze. The students looked at her, desperate, begging her to unlock it. But her face hardened. "Not until I see a badge," she whispered to them, holding a finger to her lips. She stayed crouched by the handle, unmoving. Whoever was outside banged again, harder this time. "This is the police. Open the door." The teacher didn't budge. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the pounding stopped. Heavy silence followed. The students stared at each other, hearts thundering in their chests. Then, faintly, through the intercom, the same mocking voice whispered, "Smart teacher." The class recoiled in horror. Whoever was taunting them had been right outside their door, pretending to be law enforcement. The realization was crushing. The intruder wasn't just inside the school, he was weaving himself into the chaos, manipulating both the students and the real police. Another wave of shouting erupted down the hall. The distinct pop-pop-pop of rapid gunfire tore through the silence, followed by frantic screaming and the thud of running footsteps. Mrs. McKenna covered her mouth with both hands to keep from gasping out loud. Several of the kids shook violently, their eyes wide, clutching each other like lifelines. Then, almost as if mocking them, the loudspeaker flicked on once again, and this time the intruder began humming. A soft, slow tune, eerily cheerful, echoing through every classroom. It was a children's lullaby, warped through static, and it made every hair on their bodies stand on end. A boy near the back began to cry uncontrollably until another student pressed their hand over his mouth. The humming continued, casual, as though the intruder was strolling through the halls, enjoying himself. Suddenly, the humming stopped. The loudspeaker went dead. Seconds later, the fire alarm blared, shrill and relentless. Red lights flashed in the dark classroom, casting stuttering shadows across the walls. The students jumped in terror, covering their ears. The alarm meant one thing, evacuation. But no one dared move. Mrs. McKenna hissed at them to stay put. "This isn't over." "Don't you dare move," she whispered furiously. Through the alarm, they heard the chaos outside multiply. Students from other rooms, panicked, had broken lockdown and were spilling into the halls, their shoes slapping against tile, voices shrieking as they bolted toward the exits. The police shouted, ordering them back, trying to regain control, but the flood had begun. And in that flood, hidden somewhere, the intruder was waiting. From their corner, the students in Mrs. McKenna's class listened as the panic spread, their fear deepening with every second. They stayed rooted to the floor, even as the sound of the fire alarm drilled into their skulls. Somewhere out there, among the stampede of terrified kids, someone was hunting. And the cruelest thought settled into each of their minds: maybe staying in the room was safer, or maybe it was the trap he wanted all along. The teacher pressed her forehead to the cold tile, whispering prayers under her breath. The red light kept pulsing across their faces like a heartbeat. And in the distance, cutting through the screams and alarms, came that same steady voice over the intercom, clearer this time, and closer than ever: "You're all going to leave eventually. And when you do, I'll be waiting." The fire alarm continued to scream, bouncing off every surface of the school. The strobing red light pulsed like blood through veins, disorienting anyone trapped inside. In Mrs. McKenna's classroom, no one moved. They pressed tighter into the corner, hands clamped over their ears, trying not to give in to the instinct to run. But the sound of chaos outside made staying still nearly impossible. Through the thin walls, they could hear the stampede of students who had broken protocol, sprinting toward exits in a frenzy. Shoes squealed across tile, lockers slammed open as panicked kids grabbed belongings they shouldn't have. Over it all, the police shouted themselves hoarse, ordering them back, trying to herd them into safety. But the rising wave of panic drowned out everything. Somewhere in that mix of voices, that horrible laugh drifted again, faint, distorted by the intercom system, but undeniable. Mrs. McKenna kept her body pressed against the door, refusing to move, her lips trembling with silent prayers. "Stay low. Stay quiet," she mouthed again. One of the juniors broke down, tears streaming, whispering, "We're going to die in here." Another student grabbed her hand and squeezed hard, trying to anchor her. Then came the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. It wasn't near their room, it sounded like the cafeteria windows, huge panes of glass giving way as kids tried to escape through them. Screams erupted, piercing, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunfire. 3 shots. Then silence. Then more screaming. Every single student in the classroom froze, their eyes wide, staring at each other in terror. The intercom came alive once more. Static bled through, followed by the intruder's calm, almost casual tone, "Running only makes it easier." Then the sound of slow, deliberate clapping filled the school, echoing through every room as though mocking the fear he'd caused. Each clap reverberated in their chests, louder than the alarm itself. Suddenly, the pounding of boots drew closer, real boots this time, heavy and coordinated. The police. They shouted commands, voices cutting through the alarm. "Stay where you are. Stay down." For the first time, hope flickered. The students leaned forward, straining to hear. One officer banged on their door. "Police. Open up," he yelled. Mrs. McKenna hesitated, frozen. Everyone looked at her. Was it real this time? Or another trick? The officer's voice boomed again, "Badge number 273, Springfield PD. Open the door." He slammed the butt of his rifle against it, hard enough to rattle the hinges. Mrs. McKenna's breathing quickened. She turned slowly to the kids, her face torn between fear and trust. Finally, with shaking hands, she unlocked the door. The door swung open, and 2 officers swept in, rifles raised. "We've got them. They're safe," one barked into his radio. The students collapsed into sobs, relief flooding through them. For a brief moment, it felt like the nightmare was finally breaking. The officers urged them to line up quickly, single file, hands on shoulders. "Stay quiet. Stay low. Move fast," one commanded. Mrs. McKenna gathered her students, her voice shaking but steady enough to keep them moving. They stepped into the hallway, and the world changed. The bright red flashes lit up every surface. Bullet casings glinted on the floor. Smears of blood trailed from the cafeteria toward the stairwell. The students gasped, covering their mouths, their sneakers sticking faintly to the floor in spots they didn't want to think about. The officers barked at them to keep moving. As they turned the corner, one of the students glanced at the intercom speaker above their heads. For a moment, it was silent. Then, without warning, it crackled to life again. A whisper slithered through, "I see you." The officers froze, raising their weapons, scanning every direction. "Move! Move!" one yelled, shoving the line of students forward. They hurried toward the exit, the sounds of chaos echoing through the halls, doors slamming, radios buzzing, someone crying out in pain. Just as they reached the stairwell, the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed them, the flashing red of the alarms dying instantly. The sudden silence of the stopped alarm was deafening. The students shrieked, some collapsing in panic. One officer switched on a flashlight, sweeping the beam across terrified faces and down the pitch-black corridor. And then, somewhere in the dark, too close for comfort, came the sound of humming again. That same children's lullaby, slow and steady. It wasn't coming from the intercom this time. It was echoing down the hallway. The officers whipped their rifles toward the sound. Go! Down the stairs, now, one bellowed, his voice shaking for the first time. The students bolted down the stairwell, their shoes pounding, Mrs. McKenna urging them faster. The flashlight beam flickered wildly as the officer brought up the rear, keeping his gun trained behind them. At the bottom of the stairs, just before they reached the exit, the humming stopped. The silence stretched, heavy, unbearable. Then a whisper, so close it sounded like it was right behind them, too slow. The whisper, too slow, sent the students into hysteria. They screamed, shoving one another through the stairwell as if the words themselves had claws. The officers roared for order, but fear had stripped the kids of any control. They burst out through the double doors into the open night air, lungs gulping the cold freedom like it might vanish. Police lights painted the entire front lawn in flashing blue and red, sirens wailing, radios buzzing with chaos. Officers swarmed everywhere, rifles up, voices sharp. The surviving students from other classrooms clustered in small, trembling groups under floodlights, their faces pale, streaked with tears and sweat. But even outside, safety felt fragile. The sound of crying, of panicked kids searching for friends, of police shouting contradictory orders, none of it felt secure. Mrs. McKenna gathered her class together, counting them twice, refusing to let any of them drift away. She wrapped an arm around the freshmen who hadn't stopped sobbing since the first knock on their door. The officers guided them further from the building, but the students kept looking back at the blackened windows, as though the school itself was alive and watching. Then, over the loudspeaker system still wired into the school, though the power had supposedly been cut, came that voice one last time. Smooth. Calm. Too confident. Don't worry. I'm not trapped in there with you. You're trapped out here with me.